So custom renders. Okay, so to start off with, I'll show you this handy dandy little graphic by Microsoft. So this actually is applicable not just to custom renders, but to any control, control that we render in a Xamarin Forms form content page. Yeah, thanks Microsoft. I don't want to update. All right, so we're using an entry here. Use Xamarin Forms entry as the example. Yeah. Yeah, the Azure did that last semester.
Just rebooted it, didn't you?
Yeah, I think you just gotta unplug something and plug it back in.
Unplug something.
I think you unplug that, yeah. I think this, yeah.
Do it.
Okay. Yeah, the lights move off anyway. Yeah, just, yeah. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thankfully, too hard. My friend
Oh,
Yeah.
Whatever you said.
Now it's coming back on.
It's it's a new friends.
Now it's coming back on.
Kind of acted like for like hold that track.
Yeah, so yeah, it's like I have to. Yeah, I learned that before, but I guess it's actually like it's like basically like simple language where I belong subscribe to the programming subreddit. Oh. Yeah, I haven't posted any questions out there, but people post questions all the time. Yeah, people post questions and stuff, so I'll save the links. Yeah. Yeah, I know there's an actual like programming subreddit.
Thank you.
Yeah, just don't move suddenly or anything.
So it's got a lot of students.
I will look at it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, so anytime you have a Xamarin Forms form with controls in it, it goes through this kind of schematic or this route. So say for example, this is the Xamarin Forms end up here. You get an entry. In the middle between Xamarin and the operating system, or between the native iOS or Android, you've got these renderers. And Microsoft provides a renderer, a stock one out of the box, that does the work of converting the entry into, in case of iOS, it's UI text field, and in the case of Android, it's an edit text. In case of Windows Phone, you don't really care, but it's a text box. So it does this work of conversion into the native control. So that provides us with the stock functionality, stock basic core look of whatever that control is in terms of the font and the color and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to have something that looks different than the basic stock control that comes with Xamarin or comes with iOS or Android, you have to create a custom renderer. So that's what we're going to do tonight. as I started to work on this, I kind of got down a rabbit hole because the entry is a relatively simple renderer to create the infrastructure for and to build. But once you get away from renderer, for example, content page, list view, it gets a little more complex. In fact, it gets more complex really rapidly. So the simple control like entry is not too bad. We'll start off with that, and then I might just do some mass code copy paste to get us to do the page renderer, the content page renderer. So the assignment will be based off of probably just the entry, something relatively simple that will give you guys be a lightweight assignment. I'm going to show you how to do a more complex renderer and how much work is involved in it. In my own experience, I've created custom renderers, and in fact, I'm going to show you an example that's similar to one that we did when I worked at Red Arrow Labs. But for the most part, the controls, unless you have like say a UX designer who wants some custom look to a control, for the most part, the stock basic control out of the box will cover at least 90% of the cases that you're going to need. So, but we will get into some more advanced stuff just to see, so you can see how it works. All right, so that's the theory behind it. So what we'll do now is create a new project. So this guy will be a blank forms app. We're not going to incorporate MVVM into this because MVVM will work fine with custom renderers because it's just basically binding the data between the control and the model. So it doesn't really, whether it's a custom rendered control or a basic rendered control, it'll work the same way that way. So we're not going to worry about MVVM tonight. We're just going to worry about rendering. All right, so let's use, we'll call this renderer. We can put this, if you want, you can put this in your under your repos. So under your username, source, and repos, and then that way it's ready to go for GitHub. All right, and then I'll just open and create. Okay. So we're back to a normal Xamarin Forms app. We don't have the special core library. We just have the Xamarin cross-platform, Android, and iOS. So tonight we will be working kind of a reverse of what we've been doing up to this point recently. Especially, we have been putting all of our code and all of our effort into the core for MVVM and the cross-platform stuff in Xamarin. And Android and iOS are just basically skeletons of applications that when they get compiled and built and run at runtime, all that code basically gets injected into the native piece. Tonight's going to be a little different. So tonight we're going to customize controls, which is going to involve working in the native part. All right. Okay, make this a little more readable. Okay, so first off, when we are working with custom controls, the first thing we're going to need to do is create the custom control that we want to derive from the stock control. So that piece will happen in our cross-platform stuff up here. So let's do let's go ahead and do a new file. This guy will be based off of the entry. I'm just going to create an empty class. We'll call this color entry. Okay, so this guy is going to be derived from the entry class. So this is the first thing you need to do when you want to create a custom rendered control. Is you have to derive a class from the class that you want to customize, and right click on it. You'll have to include Xamarin Forms. All right, and essentially, other than some work in the XAML, that's all we're going to need to do to create our class on the Xamarin side. The only other thing we need to do is in our main page, in our XAML, we have this goofy label. I'm going to leave it for now, but we have this local namespace, XML namespace, and the local namespace points to our assembly and our assembly namespace. So we are going to use that, and we'll create a local color entry. There it is. And we'll give it a name. Colorful. All right, so it has a name, and we'll give it some initial text. And close the tag. All right, and that is actually literally all we have to do on the Xamarin Forms side to make this work. So now we get into the fun part of creating the actual renderers. All right, so let's see. Let's start off with iOS. That's kind of the pattern we've been doing. We'll do that first and get that working, as that's usually a little bit easier. So set that as the startup project. You can go ahead. Actually, let's go ahead and build and run it right off the bat, because you just to demonstrate that this will work fine without any customization. It'll behave like a normal entry control to start off with. Entry, again, of course, is the edit control that you type text into and stuff. Okay, so I need to do some formatting, but the actual controls down at the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to change, so on the label, the vertical options on the label, I'm going to change that to start and expand. And I'm going to set the orientation of the stack layout to be vertical. And then give this guy a little padding. All right, that should do it. Scooch it down from the top. And set the horizontal options on my color entry. The center and expand also. All right, maybe just center like the other one. So now it should be a little bit more visible. But as you can see, it runs fine. It doesn't crash. And all we did was derive our control from the entry control, and so basically it just has. That's still showing this way down the bottom. Change this to start. So we haven't actually done anything to edit or modify the default behavior yet to make it work differently. Okay, so there now we've got You can see it works like any other entry control. All right, so what we're going to do is in iOS, we're going to implement our custom renderer, color renderer, and make it, we'll have it use one color pattern. And then in Android, we will do exactly the same thing, but have it appear differently. So it's basically themed by OS instead of having one generic appearance for both platforms. It will actually kind of take on the appearance of the operating system of the device. All right, so having said that, what we'll want to do, well, first of all, is everyone's run okay? No problems. All right. Okay, so I'll stop this. In the iOS, let's add a folder, and we will name this guy renderers. Make a couple of different renderers. Okay, so under renders, let's add a new file. So an empty class. We will call this color renderer. Color renderer, right? You can get rid of the constructor. All right, so now to get into the plumbing of this thing, we're going to derive this from the entry renderer. And of course, I have to do some usings. All right. So as you can see, once you include the Xamarin Forms Platform iOS, you get it picks up the entry renderer. So like I said before, every type of control that Xamarin uses that they have created has a renderer that handles how to render it on each platform, and we're going to override the default entry renderer to do our own evil bidding. All right, so now above the namespace, we have to do an export. So when you create a custom control like this that we're kind of shoehorning into the code creation aspect, you have to export it. So the way we do that is bracket. Well, this is kind of like an attribute. Way you define an attribute for an MVC controller or something like that. So we're going to go assembly. So this is an assembly directive, and we're going to say export renderer. So what this does, the syntax tells the assembly basically, or tells the linker that the assembly is going to export a renderer. The first thing we type is so we tell it the type of the control that this is going to be rendering, and that is our color entry. Yeah, our color entry up in Xamarin Land. And then it is going to be replaced, or it's going to be rendered with a type of, and this seems a little weird, but it's actually this, so color renderer. And the reason why we have to tell it that, even though we're in the color renderer file, is because this assembly directive occurs above the declaration of the class. And then I need to close this guy off with a closing bracket like that.
Hey, can you make the text a little bigger?
Yeah, sure. Right. So next thing to do is we got to fix these. We use Xamarin Forms, and this guy we need to pick up from our Xamarin Forms cross-platform project. And then finally, this, odd as it is, we have to use the very namespace that we're right above. Okay, so then that fixes that. So that tells the linker at link time that it needs to export the binary representation of this renderer to replace the stock Xamarin one. All right. So in a sense, this is kind of like, you know, you're messing around with the nuts and bolts of stuff. So in that sense, it's a little bit cool. All right. So now in our class, in our color renderer class, there is an override that you have to override, or you will crash and burn hard. So that guy, you type the override keyword. On element changed is the one we want right there. So the on element changed has an arg, an element changed event arg, and what is passed into that is the old element and then the new element. In this case, what we're interested in getting, though, is there is a property on the renderer called control. So that is the underlying control that we're working with, and we're going to check and make sure. This guy actually, this method will actually get called a couple of times. First times it runs through here, this control property might be null. So that's why we do this null check. Typically, the second time it runs through, so the first time through, it's like it's starting to generate the control. Second time through, the control is created, and we want to do our customization of it. So I do, if it's not null, we're going to set some properties on it. You can set the background color. Now we're in iOS land at this point, so we're not going to use Xamarin color. We have to use UI color. That is the iOS color type. So I'll set the background color to be blue. Try and theme this stuff to make Tim Cook and Company happy. Background color will be UI color.blue. In order to get the UI color enumerations, you have to include UI kit. So a little bit of a flashback here. Control.border style. Border style is UI text border style. If I can type. Dot. We'll make it line. Now, to change the border color of the control is a little bit more involved. Not much, but a little bit. So iOS has this concept of a layer. So to change the border color of, you have to go control.layer.border color. Can't just go control.border color for whatever reason. And I'll make that, I'll make it really stand out and ugly. .cg. Here's another thing you have to do with the color of the border, the layer color. So they must have, when they built this library, this graphics library, they must have done something special with the border. So they have this layer, and then they also don't use a regular UI color, they use a CG color, or core graphics color. I don't know if you guys remember any of the core graphics stuff we did last semester when we were drawing, but the layer, the border has to use a CG color. Then the last thing is the text color. We'll go UI color.white so it stands out against the blue background. There. Okay, so when this runs, it should replace the stock render for the color entry with this guy. So we'll see if in fact that happens. And voila. So there is our iOS custom rendered. Make sure this thing still works. Looks like it does. Okay, so that is our iOS implementation of our custom entry. Now we want to do something similar with Android so that, like I say, each platform renders it with the more or less the theme of the platform. Everyone's working so far? You know. How you doing, Nick?
Yeah, it works.
Okay,
I
cool.
gotta work.
All right. So we could put a breakpoint in here and watch it actually do this stuff, but obviously it is working, so we won't go into that detail. All right, so I'm going to stop it. And next up, we need to go into our Android project and do the same thing there. Yeah, so let's see. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to Android. Set that as the startup project. Make sure that I'm going to close this one, close this stuff down. Make sure that it works like we expect it to before we go and try and change it. Hopefully everyone's Android emulator works. Who said no? What does yours do?
Tried running it and I got 11 errors. Added Android that support that transition and Wiki is not in use. Transmission package.
How about yours, Orion? Anybody else having package error issues? You are? Oh, okay. not there yet? Okay. So those that have a functional one should look like that. Let me have a quick look at yours.
Oh, yeah, I'm going right there.
So, I'm guessing.
I know it's prompting for update stuff. I figured I didn't want to break anything.
But you did update your version of Visual Studio just recently, right?
Yeah, I did reinstall.
Right.
But I wasn't having that.
Right. No, but I think we weren't really messing around with this at that time. And I think maybe needed to reinstall it. Might have updated Java stuff.
You know what? You said that my Android stuff was way outdated. He installed some stuff.
Could be.
So
Let's have a look. Do you have Android Studio installed in here by chance? I'm not seeing it down in the tray. Go to the rocket ship. Yeah, go to the second screen of the launch. Yeah, you do. Maybe it's just outdated, or maybe Xamarin's outdated. So I'll have to see if you can before we move on with an assignment out of this. Because it's really, this is the one thing that really is very specific that you want to see both platforms working. Most of the stuff we do, you don't want a platform working. It looks okay. It's not giving me any errors or warnings. Alright, so I'm not sure. You may have to just do an examine, update, or reinstall and fix that. I do see it has you do have an emulator listed in your Visual Studio, so I'm not sure why you're getting all these errors. Maybe close it down. Close this guy here and close that screen with all the errors on it, because that's intermediates. That's like when it's creating the Java. Try doing a clean all. Drum roll. It'll be one of the last things it does, so I'm guessing it means to crap. Oh no, very good. All right. So
Weird.
who knows?
Okay.
It's the mystery of Microsoft.
Try running.
Yeah.
Same deal.
Yeah, actually, did that happen when you're trying to run it? Because maybe it's actually still an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to run it.
So it may, to see what happens when you run it.
Yeah.
See if it actually does run. Or you may have to select a different emulator if you have one.
Being very slow. It's still working. Oh, it worked.
All right, yay.
Wow.
Go team. All right, cool. So here we are. And Android land. Christine, did yours work?
Yeah.
Okay. Josh, I assume yours okay too? Yeah, all right. All right, good. Let's, so now in Android land, we need to do the same basic thing. We're going to do an add new folder called renderers. And we'll do an add new file. We could probably just copy the file, but I know you guys just love typing this stuff out. So we'll call this oops. Just to demonstrate that this will not confuse the compiler if we name it the exact same thing in a different namespace, being very careful to retain the namespace information. So what we can do is go down to our original color renderer in iOS and copy this line out of here, because that also is the same. So there's a fair amount of shared code here. And of course we have to add our using statements. And then life is good. Alright, so just like we did before, we need to go ahead and derive this from entry renderer. And it's going to balk about it, so we have to add the using. And then we get some ugliness, these orange lines here. So this is one difference between iOS and Android, is in Android, when you're doing a renderer like this, you have to pass in a context. So type is context, and let's call it context. So this should, the quick fix for this will be, don't pick the top one, don't pick the system runtime, pick the using Android.content. And then we have to call the base class implementation. And then that makes everything happy. So in Android, natively, when you create a control, the constructor of that control gets the context injected into it. So the context is similar to the bundle in iOS. It basically contains resources and layout information, and that kind of stuff gets passed into the class. All right, so then we also have to do the override on the onElementChanged. It has the same signature as iOS, but everything inside it is going to be different. We'll still do the null check. Shoot. All right, so anyway, in here what we'll do is we don't have a direct background property in Android. We can say control.set background color, and then we have to do a little bit of weirdness here. We need to call the global qualifier, and we're going to use the Android global namespace, Android.graphics .color .green. We'll do Android green. That sets background color, and we can go control dot. Again, this is a setter, set text color. Same thing, global Android dot graphics dot color dot. I don't know, we have yellow. It'll also be Packer colors. All right. Save that. So now, with that modified, that really should be all we need to do to get our Android renderer to show up. So with that set as our startup project, we can run it and wait about 5 minutes for the Android emulator to start up. All right, so hopefully you guys see the same thing, something similar. Is that working for everyone? Good, good. All right, so your assignment's not going to be much different than this. You know, you do something similar. I may, I don't even think there's a custom renderer for a label because it's like all the properties that you'd want to change on a label you can do just through Xamarin, but I don't know, I'll think of something. So this, again, is handy when you have like the standard renderers come pretty close to the way the OS has the control look. There are some that aren't really quite right, like the picker control is an example, and a couple other things. So if you want to, like if you have a graphics designer who says, no, I want it to look exactly like the native control, then you might do something like this. Or if you have, if you actually have, I've seen some UX designers who prefer a web kind of look to it as opposed to the native look. And then, you'd make pretty heavy use of this kind of stuff to make it, actually behave or look like a web control instead of a native control. All right, so that's the entry control. Next up, we're going to take a quantum leap forward in complexity. So I may just, this will be a good experience. I think actually what we'll do, may keep it on Android and work with Android, because Android's actually going to be a little bit more complex of the two. Plus, with Android, yeah, definitely we'll use Android, because Android you can use, what we're going to do is we're going to create a camera app, which of course makes heavy use of the hardware, and the two platforms differ dramatically in the way they use the camera. So the camera is actually a real life example where you almost have to use custom renderers to make it work right. The out-of-the-box implementation just sucks. So this will be a good example, and the reason we want to use Android is because Android actually provides a camera emulator. iOS does not. So if we're going to do iOS, we'd actually have to use, we'd have to have a device hooked up. Oh, camera, there it is. So this is, if you start up the camera app, if you have the Android Oreo API 27 like I do, if you start up the camera app, you should see something like this that is designed to give you a seizure if you have epilepsy. I don't know why it has this jiggling thing going on, but anyway, tap on the camera button and it will time down, take a picture. If I go home button, no. One of the photos, I've taken a few of these. Anyway, so that's basically it. So it's going to involve a couple things that are hardware related. One is we need to access the camera. The other is we are going to need to access the photo storage, the photo gallery. So a couple of things we need to keep in mind. With Android, it's all about permissions, so we have to set the necessary permissions to allow us to do that. All right, so how do we want to start this off? Right now we have mainpage.xaml. We're going to want to do a little bit of navigation work. So we're going to add a second page. So let's go into the mainpage.xaml first off. Okay, we have our color entry stuff underneath there. Let's create a button. Name of this button will be Take Photo Button. Text equals take photos. Horizontal option equals center. Vertical options. Yeah, we'll center and expand. And then clicked. So instead of using an MBX command like we're doing with MV and cross and all that wonderful binding stuff, we'll just revert back to using event handlers and take photo clicked. All right. Something like that. See if it gives me, it doesn't give me the option to. I'm going to go ahead and build this right away just to see what happens. I want to see if it'll flag me because this doesn't exist. Yeah, it looks like it did. Doesn't offer me the quick fix though. All right, so that's fine. So next thing we want to do is go into the XAML and make sure, the code behind for the XAML, and make sure that we implement this. Copy that name. So we will make this an async void. Paste in the name of it. It needs an object, which is the sender, and an event args. The reason I made it async is we're going to use an await and call navigation dot push async. And do a new camera page. Which of course doesn't exist yet. Let's see if it'll give me, if it'll create it for me. It'll create it. I don't know if it's going to create. I want it to create the XAML too, and I don't know if it's going to do that. No, it didn't. So I'm just going to delete it. So we'll go ahead and add that in ourselves. So let's do that right away. In the Xamarin Forms cross-platform project, we'll right-click, do add, new file, be a forms content page XAML file, and we'll call this camera page. All right. So now that actually exists. This is how crazy this upside down implementation stuff is. This is all we're going to do in Xamarin. So it's pretty not a lot there. We don't even need to modify anything in the code in the actual XAML. So that's basically all it's going to be. Is it's just going to be a placeholder, and then we're going to do the implementation details all on the platforms. So this is something that when you're doing Xamarin Forms development, if you run into a lot of cases where you would have to do a lot of this custom rendering stuff, it probably means you'd be better off just doing it using Xamarin Classic, which builds out an Android and an iOS project and doing it all natively. Because, you end up having to do these renderers anyway, and then you've got an extra layer of complexity in there. So this is just to show you, like, if you're doing one-off kind of things, this is what it's going to entail. But you wouldn't want to do this with all your controls, because then it really is. There's no sense in using Xamarin Forms. Right, so back in the main page, we now have a camera page, so that's good. Now we need to go back into our Android project and really shake things up. Okay, so if you guys recall way back when it all started, we worked with Xamarin Android and Xamarin iOS natively, and the first project assignment you guys had was to do a native, that was the data validation thing that we did. So we're gonna, this will be a little bit of a, I have to dust this off because we haven't really worked with it in a while, but down in the Android, in the resources, we are going to need to add a layout file for our camera. So Android uses layout files or AXML files. So because it wasn't all that confusing, Microsoft based their XML files for Xamarin Forms, called them XAML, and in Android they're AXML, AXML. So just to, in native Android it's not, it's just XML, but Microsoft being Microsoft, they decided to call it AXML or Android XML. All right, so let's see. In our resources, okay, we do have a layout. So if I open up the tab, it's a toolbar.axml. So this is not much, in fact, not much of anything in here. There is ID. There's gets the layout height and width and stuff like that. Sets the basic parameters for displaying it. Background. So this is what the Android XML file looks like. In iOS, you might recall our fun with the interface builder, where we would actually go and define the interface in Xcode, and then the changes will be reflected back in Visual Studio. In Android, it's these layout files. So what we'll do is we'll create a layout file for our camera page, because it's going to need it. So let's go ahead and do an add, new file. They're actually, under Android, there is a layout option, and that's what we'll want. And we'll call it camera layout. You don't have to add the extension on, it'll do that. And it opens up in Designer, but it takes a long time, so I'm just going to go into source. I think there's a way to make this not all run out like that, but to make it formatted. No, that's not it. Could have sworn there's a way of doing this. Guess that's not it. All right, so I'll just do it the old-fashioned way, I guess. This has the same kind of stuff in it. All right, so it starts with a linear layout for the camera to work properly. And I don't expect you to have to know this, but this needs to be a frame layout instead of a linear layout. Let's add an attribute up here at the root level. So everything is prefixed with Android in here. We'll set the layout Weight one, right? And that just designates that everything is equally weighted. All right, so now we're going to create our views. We want a texture view. The texture view is what's going to actually hold our image. Little Android ID. And here is the syntax for defining Android IDs. You go @ plus ID / like I have there, and then the actual name, texture. All right, so what that basically means is this @ qualifier says that we are, with the plus means we're creating this ID, or it needs to be created in the resources, and then it's just the name of it. So Android, we need to set the layout margin top. Margin top is going to be the margin between this control and what's above it. Equals, and you don't have to worry about how this XML syntax stuff. It's you just need to get this thing made. Layout width equals wrap content. Okay, so that basically will say use up all the available width. If you need to use more, go ahead and wrap the content. Layout height equals also wrap content. So I don't know if this stuff is starting to look familiar from when we did this back at the beginning of last semester. All right, so I'm going to, the rest are going to be all buttons. So we should be able to just copy and paste once we get the first one made. So create a button. I'm going to copy this because I suck at typing. And we'll just rename it. This will be toggle flash button. Turn the flash on and off. And let's see, Android layout width equals, hang on a second. I have some of these guys local. I'll have to, oh, that's the other thing. I'm going to have to give you guys these resources, these button resources. Let me see, there's also projects. Just looking to see what the dimensions are of this. I will put these actually in Slack. That'll be the easiest way to share this stuff. Since not everyone can see the learning plans. All right, where am I? I'm lost. Okay. Well, let's. I wonder if I can just drag and drop these in here. Okay. Okay, so that's the first one. That is the flash. This is going to be the take picture. And finally, the toggle camera. Okay, so we need those three. All right. So go ahead and download those. You'll want to get them into the resources drawable folder. So I'm going to need to get those in there too. But put those in your resources drawable folder, Android. You don't need to worry about the other resolutions. I'll just put it in the drawable folder for now. And once you have them stored away, go ahead and I'll show you how we can find out dimensions and stuff. Okay, so with those guys in there, looks like it does not show the dimensions of it. But actually, we need to set these. Okay. Wow, I didn't do that at first. Anyway, so the build action should be Android resource on each one of these PNG files. You right-click on it and show Reveal in Finder. In Finder, it will show you the dimensions of the resource. So the no flash is 64 by 64. Take photo button is 143 by 143. 1/3. So these are PNGs, so these are scalable. All right. So the toggle flash button we want to be fairly small because this is going to appear up near the top. We don't want it to be intrusive on the picture. So let's make it 37 display points. Android layouts. Height, we'll make it square 37 dp. We'll set the layout gravity. We'll go to the top and the left. So we want this to be up in the top left corner as far as it'll go. Which I think is the default behavior of the Android camera, but we'll see. Layout, margin, left, 25 dp on layout margin top. Once we get this typed in, we don't have to worry about the rest of them. We'll just copy and paste. 25 dp. Android background, so this actually sets the resource. So this is in our drawable folder, so the at references a drawable. And you can see it actually shows the resources now that we've added them to the project. So we want the no flash button. And close that off. All right, so that's our button for that. Now we can just copy this. Two times. Next one will be the switch camera button. This one is rectangular. You can keep the width. Let's make the height about 25. And it will be anchored top right instead of top left. Margins are good, and then you need to change this to toggle camera. Can't toggle camera button. So yeah, the flash and the camera, almost done with this. Finally, the most important one, the take photo. This guy is around double, roughly 65 by 65. Margin, we need to add a margin bottom to this. Actually, these can go away, so we'll just change this left to bottom. This can be down near the bottom of the screen. And the margin bottom, let's make that pretty small, near the bottom, 15. And then the layout gravity is going to be center bottom. So it's centered down near the bottom of the screen. And then finally, resource is going to be take photo button. There, that's our UI. No, thank you. That would cause problems. Thanks for catching that. Okay. See what the designer shows, if anything. Yeah, kind of. Okay. So that's the easy part. So obviously when you've got something like you're using the camera, the way that the two platforms utilize it is drastically different, because in iOS it's like you don't have a layout file, you don't do any of this, it's entirely different. And the way you would format it to either hug the upper right, hug upper left, or center bottom is also different. So for that reason, they don't provide a whole lot of support for hardware-intensive stuff because its implementation is so different on both platforms. So you don't see a whole lot of stock Xamarin Forms camera apps because they don't, they just don't behave real well. Let's see. Interesting. Not gonna worry about that. Okay. So let's see, what do we want to do next? Implementations of these is going to be pretty intense, but we need to create our renderers. So we're just doing Android for now, so we'll just do the Android renderer, and we'll see how much time we have. So do an add new file. This will be a general empty class, and it's going to be camera render. All right. Just to make this a little more clear, I'm going to change the name of this to Camera Page Renderer, because we're actually rendering a content page is what we're doing. So I'll rename the file as well. There. So I think what I'm going to do with this, because this is really code intensive, is copy a lot of it, give it to you guys in Slack, and then you can go ahead and use it. Just paste it in, because yeah, it gets pretty intensive. But this is a good way to demonstrate the difference in the platforms. All right, so once again, up here at the top, we can probably just let's just go ahead and type it out. So this is another assembly export. Type of, we call it camera page, I'm pretty sure. That's the Xamarin class. And type of this, which is camera page renderer. Parentheses, bracket. Okay. So of course we have to do all of our usings. Right. So now is where things start to get a little bit crazy. This is derived from Page Renderer. Before we were deriving from Entry Renderer with our entry control. This one is derived from Page Renderer. As with our entry control, we have to pass in a context to this. We'll call the base class as implementation of it. Oops. And remember to add the using Android.content. All right. In addition to subclassing from Page Renderer, our camera page renderer also needs to implement an interface. the texture view dot iSurface texture listener. All right, so we need to fix this using Android.views, and we need to implement all the interface stuff. So we can just go ahead and do the implement interface. It'll create all these empty methods, but the compiler's happy. So in Android, Android uses this texture view for rendering images and stuff, pictures, and it implements this interface, this iSurface texture listener. And so when changes are made to the surface, a lot of these things get called. If you pan it, update it, these events get fired. And it passes in a surface texture and width and height and all that stuff. We're not going to get into native image manipulation because it's crazy complicated. You might remember we did a little bit of that last semester, and it gets out of hand pretty quickly. So what I will do is, well, first of all, we need to also implement the one that we're really interested in. This is the on-element change, like we did for the entry guys. Override void on element changed. And let me see how I want to do this. Yeah, a ton of code. All right. I think what I'm going to do to avoid from really muddying this up too much with a lot of stuff that we really don't need to learn is I'm just going to give you guys a lot of the code that is required to do the actual camera manipulation stuff. All right, so we'll make heavy use of Slack here. All right, so first off are going to be properties and variables. So these will go at the class declaration level near the top. It may complain about the camera being obsolete, but we're not going to worry about it for now. It'll work. Or it should work. All right, so those need to go at the class level. Okay. In our on-element changed, this we will go ahead and code up because this is the part that actually deals with the plumbing of the renderer. We can do an if check. If E, which is the event arg dot old element, is not equal to null, or element is equal to null, return. So this passes in an old element, and then the one you're using to replace it with. So you want to make sure that the old element is null and the new element is not null. That's basically all we're doing. Then we're going to set up a try handler. Function X. We'll do a system dot diagnostics dot debug dot write line, and we'll write out the error. Let's see how the Android uses the @ sign. Error. So this is the most native coding we're going to do for this class. All right. What we're going to do is we'll make 3 method names, 3 methods. Set up user interface. Set up event handlers and add view. It needs to be a lowercase v. And that view comes from, oh, yeah, I didn't have my own global variables. That, all right, so to fix these errors, you can just add the usings. So you notice that with the camera facing, that's in the Android hardware namespace. All right. So now we need to implement these methods. So each one of these is just going to be a void. So we can go ahead, see what it does for us here. Yeah, okay, perfect. It goes ahead and sets them up. So you can just generate the method, use the quick fix generate method. Now, we'll go ahead and go in order. Here is the code for the setup user interface. And we'll talk through this, but I'm not going to. This is mostly just very specific Android stuff. Like I say, when I was doing this, when I was setting this up, I started to realize that this is way more than what we really need to go over. But it's kind of a cool thing to work with the camera. So, so to go over this code, setup user interface. So this is actually pretty standard Android stuff. The view, which we declared up here as a class member variable, that guy is created by the layout inflator. So the layout inflator is kind of a funny name, but it does exactly like the name implies. It takes the layout that is stored in our camera layout file, this that we created over here, our AXML file, takes that layout and inflates it and creates the controls out of it. It's kind of a funny way of calling it out, but that's the way Android's always done it. They take the XML file, they inflate it, sometimes it's called hydrating it, to create the controls. Camera type, of course, is just whether you're using the back-facing or front-facing aspect of the camera. And then the texture view, we worked with this a little bit last semester, but this is all review, very distant review. So find view ID basically tells it to look in the layout for this ID here, which if we go back to the layout, corresponds with this ID. That's the texture view. So find view by ID. After this layout has been inflated, we'll pull this texture view out of the layout and create a control from it. All right, so that's what it's doing there. Creates the texture view, and then it sets the delegate or the listener interface delegate to be this class. So because this class is implementing the listener stuff in this stuff that we have here that we implemented. All right, so that's what it's doing with the setup user interface. It's grabbing the controls out of the layout file and creating them and then setting up that listener. That's all it's really doing. Okay, so that's that one. Next one we need to do is the setup event handlers. So I'll take that and we'll talk about that. It's pretty straightforward. That's what you guys will need. Post that in here. Go ahead and paste that code into the setup event handlers. So by way of explanation, it's pretty straightforward. It is doing the same thing we were doing with the texture view, where it's doing the find view by ID using the take photo button, switch camera button, toggle flash button, and then it's setting up a click handler, which we have to define. So you can right click on those and do a generate method for each one of those. All right. All right, so now we get into a lot of the meat of it. Let's do the take photo button tapped one first, because that's the most important one. Let's get rid of the private and just set it to be an async void. And then you need the code for that. Paste it in here first, and then give it to you guys. All right, let you go ahead and paste that into that handler. I think I pasted in the wrong one. Yeah, I did. Oops, it doesn't go in the toggle flash, goes in the take photo. So a lot of this stuff is really, you'll need to resolve the users. A lot of this stuff is really intensive stuff dealing with image manipulation and file stream stuff. All right, so there's two different usings that can be used for the camera. We want the hardware one, I think. And it'll still Tell you about my camera. Needs to be lowercase c, I believe. Oh wait, that's fine. There. Let's see what we got going on down here. We need to fix the file stream using system.io, and then this compressed bitmap. And this needs to be async. All right. Oh yes, we need to fix this. Okay, so we need to create an instance. All right, so everything else looks like compiled, so we'll go through this. It needs to get the storage directory for the photos. So that's what it's doing here. It's getting the Android OS environment path variable. And then it's just doing some file path manipulation stuff to get the final path. And it creates a file stream or write stream basically to that file. Compresses the bitmap using a compression algorithm, and then writes it, closes the stream, and then this intent here. So Android, when you want to pass data between different activities or different screens, you create an intent. You also do that when you want to go out on the internet. You create an internet intent, and you can do it with a file. You create a file intent. And all it's doing is it's setting the data into the file with this intent. And this guy we need to create, this instance down here. So that's what it's doing with the take photo stuff. We need to fix that. Lowercase. All right. Good. So we need to create this instance, and that is in our main activity class, and that is necessary for us to do a broadcast event. I'm going through this stuff fast because you guys are, you're not going to need to know this, but just so you can have a little bit of an idea of what's going on. Let's see, up here, we're going to create an internal static main activity instance get private set probate. That basically creates a singled-in instance of the main activity, so you can broadcast through it. All right, so let's see how much more of this stuff I want to. We need to do the switch camera button. We need to do some of these implementation things. What time we got? Okay, it's getting late. You know what? I think maybe in the interest of getting this to run, what we might have to do is I might just have to give you the code for this whole file. I think the names should match up. Because otherwise we're going to be at this, we're not going to get this done in time. And I want to actually run it. Yeah. Let's just do that. I think this will work. If not, we'll just call it good. So I'm just taking the contents of this. I could just upload. Yeah, it's a different name. I'll just take the contents of the file. Just paste this stuff into the page renderer. So we can get this to run, because we're going to have to mess around with the emulator a little bit too, I think. Might need me to... I think this is too big, maybe. Yeah, just try that out. We'll see if it compiles. And I knew this was going to be a pretty serious undertaking to do. Once you get that pasted in there, let's go ahead and build it. We'll have to go over some of these methods later. You're not going to need them for the assignment, so we can go over them at a later time. Okay, it looks like naming conventions are the same, so we're good to go there. Mine built okay. If yours doesn't build, let me know. All right, so let me think here. Other things we need to do is we need to go into the Android manifest. So select the render.android, right click, and go to options. All right, and then this is under the build, there's an Android application menu item. This is where we set the Android manifest permissions. So the manifest ships with the application and defines what the application has access to. So we need the camera. If you type in down the filter box down here, the search box, it'll come up with that. Set the camera. We need that permission. The other thing we need is storage. We need to write external storage and probably read external storage as well. In iOS, this should be set through the info.plist, and Android is done here. If you guys need me to go over that again, I can. So the two that you want to set are, three you want to set are camera, read external storage, and write external storage. And then once you get that, click OK. And roll the dice and click Run. Okay, now with that added screen layout in there, we should have a Take Photos button in the main XAML, and then I got an inbuilt operations section. Oh yeah, that's because duh. All right, so missing an important step here. You'll probably get a navigation exception if you try to tap on that button like I did. The reason for that is in going way back to our, one other thing we need to do in our XAML or in our Xamarin Forms app is in the app.xaml.cs. We have this main page equals new main page. We have to change that. Another little flashback for you. This needs to be a new navigation page. In the constructor that, we need to pass in new main page. Otherwise, we have no navigation stack. Go ahead and stop it and restart it. With these native applications, if you make modifications to like layout or something in the resources folder, you have to do a clean and rebuild, or else it usually will not pick up those changes. You take photos, and we still got a runtime exception. Fail to connect to camera service is the exception I'm getting. All right, let's see, I'm going to stop it. So I'm going to go, I'm assuming you guys probably got that same exception. Yeah. You didn't get an exception? Did they actually bring up the camera?
No.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So to modify, so sometimes these emulators don't pick up the request, or they pick them up, but they don't honor their request of the application. So let's go into the apps. Sorry, didn't want to do that. Let's go to settings. Go to apps and notifications. And let's, right at the top is render.android. There should be a permissions section. I don't even see anything to do with the camera. Oh yeah, there it is. So storage is set, but for some reason it didn't set the camera permission. So I'll turn that on if this is off. I'll go back. And so we don't overwrite what we just did there. I am just going to start render up from the emulator. And then take photos. Okay, so now we've got the camera up, got our button, got our flash button in the upper left. We might have the switch camera in the upper right, but I can't, it's hard to see because it's white. So I'm going to do a take photo. Okay, so it didn't crash, that's a good thing. So it should have taken the photo. You can check by going out and going into the photos. I have several of them, but you guys should only have one of those. And it'll list it by chronologically in descending order. So looks like that did work. Success. Yeah, looks like it's good. So see if it's running. I'll click on this one. Stop it. And then press button. What is the try running it from there and see if there's a real exception.
No. All right, so that's all you're getting is can't connect to the service. So, not sure why. Could be differences in the emulator. Which emulator would I guess the next thing to try would be to delete the application from the emulator, redeploy it, make sure that in your Android manifest file that it is set to on. And then go back into your permissions, make sure the camera is set and storage is set. Redeploy it, but don't run it. Just let it deploy and then stop it right away. And then go and set the permissions button and everything. Because if it can't connect to the service, that's a permission thing. Anybody else have success?
Two steps.
Oh, okay. Do you know which? What time we got? Which one? Do you know which ones you missed?
No.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's supposed to open with the camera on, and you should see the little jiggly. No, you don't want to send yet. You want to deploy it, stop the app, and then send. Right. Does this emulator is it set up with a? It's set up with a camera. So go to the. You'll actually have to do this in the emulator manager. So you can go to Visual Studio. You'll want to go to the tools and device manager. And optimize single memory. Get one of the settings. Or I think if you just double click on it. Maybe we shall stop it once. Well, do this too. Yeah, go ahead. There you go. Yeah, just turn the camera front, turn that to emulator as well. Okay, so we can then try. You probably have to stop it and start it now that you change the setting. And I would say, yeah, just go. You can also go to the camera app on the emulator and make sure that. That's cool. Nick, how did yours go?
It's working.
Oh, cool. I'm sorry. Oh, damn it. All right. Let's see if you can
Yeah, I'll be right back. We're going back quick.
Christine, how about you?
I also got time, so that's all you can
Okay. Yeah, I thought she was giving us a sort of start with. May have to click the up arrow against bumps and that. If you want to see what it's doing, if go to the deploying to device in the very lower right of the status code at the bottom. And then you scroll down to the bottom. It's still working on it. Okay.
So, yeah, we'll probably not worry about it right now. I'll upload this project so you guys can get a hold of it. I'll actually probably put it in GitHub because these guys in Rapids don't even have access to the learning plans. So I'll put it in GitHub. So for the assignment that I'll probably write up either tonight or tomorrow night, I'll just have you guys create a much more basic render. You're not going to have to worry about working with the camera. I wanted to show you the camera renderer. There's also a list view renderer that also is very, very intense. I wanted to show the camera renderer so to give you a chance to work with the hardware a little bit because it's probably one of the best examples of why you would need to do a custom renderer. Most of the stuff you do in the UI is not going to require a custom renderer, but when you work with things like mapping is another one. Maps has a custom renderer. List View has a custom renderer. The camera or the content page, I should say, does. View might be another example of a little bit easier one to work with, but this just gives you an idea of what's involved. We didn't get into the iOS part of it, so what I'll do is I'll upload a completed project that has both iOS and Android. Then next time when we meet, we'll go over the differences so you can really see how a custom renderer differs significantly from platform to platform. So yeah, still going. That's basically about all I had. So you guys can have some time to work on your projects or whatever you want to do. Oh yeah, I'm recording this too. I forgot.